a list of the valuation methods that economists use to value ecosystem services. Now, it obviously depends on what service you're looking at. There's a matrix, which remind me, Lola, to give you to send to everybody. It's a matrix that shows you which valuation method is appropriate for which ecosystem service. And there's a suite of, I think, 21 categories that we look at. So an example of hedonic valuation, like looking at the value of property values, essentially. I think you guys know that a property value near the view of the ocean is probably it's higher value than one that has a view of a cement wall, like I do. So that's one way to transfer the value to an ecosystem for providing that service of aesthetic beauty is one way. Contingent valuation, I would say that's providing surveys asking what people are willing to pay to partake in a recreational activity, or what are they willing to pay to restore a wetland. So that's largely based on surveys. Avoided cost. An example of that is Hurricane Sandy. There was, I can't remember how many billions of dollars in damages Hurricane Sandy caused. Had they had their sand dunes there instead of houses and roller coasters in the way, that would have provided some protection. And so I guess one way to put a value to those sand dunes is to look at the cost of damages. They would have probably avoided some of that damage. And so, again, that's one way to transfer value to natural systems. I know these are kind of unique ways to put value, but they are being used in local and federal government, so they are widely accepted by various agencies, and we've used this for the past 15 years. Replacement cost is similar to avoided cost, but what would it cost to replace that service? Now, again, not all of these services are easy to replace, and some you cannot really replace at all. So that's I don't want to go too much into this because I know Zach is going to talk about the methods. Is this good enough for now, or do you want me to talk about the rest? Okay. I'll just move on. Okay. So let me just get a time check here, because I want to leave 20 minutes for questions. So I have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, or even a little more, like 20
minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who knows where this is?
Ecuador.
Yes, Ecuador. The brown spot is Ecuador, South America. So now I'm going to talk about, so I just talked about the concepts. Now I want to talk about how we use them, because that's where I'm more familiar than where I can really dive into our work at Earth Economics. So 8 years ago, I went to Pacific Lutheran University and I studied economics, and I needed an internship, and Earth Economics in Tacoma needed an intern, so I went there to help with a project in Ecuador. And this is actually not the project I wanted to talk about first, but that's okay. I worked with, our office was 4 people, and 2 of us got to go to Ecuador to work with the government, Correa's government, who's still the president, and the indigenous groups. And I will get back to that in a moment after I talk about INTAG, which is this study. The ecological study of Ecuador's INTAG region. That's based in the Andean region. And I don't know if you have what you know about Ecuador, but it's basically, there's 3 general regions in Ecuador. There's the Amazonian region, Andean region, and the Pacific Coast region. Very different. In the Andean region, next slide. Okay, there's the study I want to talk to. In the Amazonian region, it's the rainforest, and they have voluntary non-contacted indigenous groups there. So they've never met people like us before. They've only met other indigenous groups that have been to Quito, the capital of Ecuador. In addition to that incredible piece There's also a high incidence of biodiversity, endemic species, and unfortunately there's also an oil reserve in this region. Not only where there's high biodiversity, it's a hot spot, but also where the uncontacted indigenous groups are. So my first project at Earth Economics was to basically coordinate a workshop with the local government, NGOs, and indigenous groups to talk about value. Now you can imagine talking to, I think the next slide, the Waorani, what they think about dollar values. They don't care about, dollars, pesos, or whatever. They care about the true, they know exactly what the functions are. They depend on these services. We call them goods and services. They depend on nature, Pachamama, directly. So I actually took this picture at the conference, and they were just a great group of people because this initiative that we were a part of, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, was one way to get various actors together. You have President Korea, the Vice President. We had three cabinet members, including the cabinet member of Energy and Mines, part of this initiative. We had the Waorani, we had businesses and NGOs, both local and international, supporting this initiative to not extract oil. So I don't know if you've heard in the news about the Yasuni initiative. It started in 2007. It hasn't been extracted, but up until 2013, President Korea decided that the Chinese investment they couldn't pass it, so they decided to end the initiative, which was to leave it in the ground. So this was a big lesson for me in terms of when you value nature, you can't just value nature and then expect local groups to run with the report. You need to provide that fifth element that I said I won't talk about, well, I'm going to touch on it a little bit, is the funding mechanism. You really need to, make sure people understand what you're providing and how they can create a funding mechanism for this asset. So what they did is they created a trust fund at the UN level and just expected people to voluntarily provide funding for this initiative, to have Ecuador leave oil in the ground. And they were expecting, I think, $3.5 billion. Well, they had a couple countries provide some $1 million here, $1 million there, but it just wasn't equivalent to what Korea wanted, which was half of the expected oil revenue. So, I've learned throughout the years that you can't just rely on voluntary donations. You really need to start thinking about some type of tax or fee system so they can start thinking about a funding mechanism for these protected areas if you're going to get serious about it. We learned that Korea, even before he officially ended the initiative, he was already drilling oil in the protected area. So good governance is one important key you want to look for, which is a little difficult, but